Good afternoon. I call this meeting of the Standing Senate Committee on Banking, Trade, and Commerce to order. Today, the committee meeting is divided into two parts. During the first hour, we are continuing our study on the uses of digital currency, including the potential risk, threats, and advantages of these electronic forms of exchange. And in the second hour, the committee will resume its study of Bill S-202, an act to amend the Payment Card Networks Act. In both sessions today, we will be hearing from representatives of both Visa and MasterCard, although the individual witnesses will be different. So dealing with our first hour, let me give you a quick summary on our study of digital currency to date. Commencing last spring, the committee received presentations from the Department of Finance, the Bank of Canada, and the Canada Revenue Agency. We heard testimony from academics in the fields of economic and monetary history, cryptography, and from the Bitcoin Strategy Group, the Bitcoin Exchange CA Vertex, and BitAccess, the makers of Bitcoin ATMs. Colleagues may also recall that on April the 9th, 2014, using the Bitcoin ATM, which we brought into this committee room, I purchased 0.18% of a Bitcoin for $100 Canadian. And I regret to inform you that as of 12 p.m. today, that 0.18 is worth $76.89, if you can find a buyer. The committee also heard from the Canadian Payment Association and from three companies directly involved in payment systems, namely Interac and PayPal, who deal with fiat currency, and BitPay, which is a payment system for Bitcoin. Today, we will hear from the two largest credit card payment network operators in Canada, namely Visa and MasterCard. Representing Visa Canada, we welcome Mr. Derek Colfer, Head of Technology and Innovation, and from MasterCard, Ms. Sherry Hammond, Senior Vice President, Digital Channel Engagement, Emerging Payments, and Mr. Jason Davies, Head of Emerging Payments. I understand Mr. Colfer has some opening remarks to be followed by Ms. Hammond. Mr. Colfer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Senator Gerstein. I spent the last couple years of high school in Ottawa growing up, so I have very fond memories of this town. It feels like I'm home, so thank you very much for having us. Good afternoon, Senator Gerstein, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear and contribute to this study. As this committee knows well, there is a great deal of interest and excitement around the future of the payments industry and today's topic of digital currencies. You have heard from many witnesses already, with most of them offering new information and insights. I hope I can also contribute to your deliberations in a meaningful way. I know this committee continues to study issues in respect to payments, but allow me to give you a quick reminder and overview of our organization, Visa. Visa's brand is really quite well known, but the organization's core functions are sometimes less understood, and in some cases, misunderstood. Visa is a global payment technology company that connects consumers, businesses, financial institutions, and governments in more than 200 countries and territories to fast, secure, and reliable electronic payments. We operate one of the world's most advanced processing networks, known as VisaNet, that is capable of handling more than 56,000 transaction messages per second, with fraud protection for consumers and assured payment for merchants. On an average day, VisaNet sustains and successfully blocks over 300,000 cyber attacks. In fact, in the 5 minutes time I am taking to make these comments, Visa has the potential to process over 14 million transactions in 175 local currencies and block over 1,000 cyber attacks. Visa has been operating in Canada for more than 40 years. Within Canada, financial institutions have issued more than 32 million Visa cards, and the company serves more than 700,000 point-of-sale terminals across the country. Visa facilitates Canadian commerce through the transfer of payments across our network securely and reliably every second of every day. And as Head of Technology and Innovation in Canada, I can assure you that we are deeply committed to preserving the trust that the Canadian consumers, merchants, and financial institutions place in our products. Trust is the cornerstone of an electronic payment system, and consumers have long trusted Visa's safety and efficiency. As a result of the industry's security investments, we've seen fraud rates in the Visa payment system decline by more than 2/3 over the past 2 decades, and rates today remain low and stable. But when fraud does occur, Visa cardholders are protected through Visa's zero liability policy, which protects cardholders from being held liable for unauthorized use of Visa cards. Virtual currencies do not offer these same protections for consumers. Zero liability, guaranteed payment, security, the strength of our network are some of the reasons why consumers and merchants choose to use and accept Visa. These are also some of the issues that consumers, merchants, and governments will need to consider when thinking about virtual currencies. For example, transactions occurring over Visa generally take less than 1 second to verify, while transactions using popular virtual currencies can take many minutes, several minutes in fact. Point-of-sale merchants who accept virtual currencies for payment are accepting all of the risk, whereas merchants who accept Visa have an almost instantaneous notification of a customer's ability to pay. These are just some of the important aspects of virtual currencies that we continue to follow closely. The ecosystem for our industry has grown substantially, and it includes not just merchants and financial institutions, but technology companies, mobile network operators, mobile device manufacturers, and platform providers. Visa is a trusted payment network that provides global acceptance, superior network security, and exceptional customer service. For these reasons, Visa will continue to be a leader and play a critical role in enabling commerce in the future. I thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Colfer. Ms. Hammond.
Thank you for the opportunity to take part in this study. You have picked a broad and complex topic, so I will keep my remarks focused on 4 areas: the current payments landscape in Canada, global trends with payments, opportunities we see in this changing landscape, and the risks posed by virtual currency. First, a brief word about our role in the payment system. MasterCard is a technology company. Our technology and expertise powers 1.9 billion cards accepted at 35.9 million merchant locations in more than 210 countries and territories. This gives people in every corner of the world the ability to conduct commerce safely and securely in a fraction of a second, something that is often taken for granted. MasterCard runs the network that allows those card transactions to take place. Individual banks get MasterCard branded cards into the hands of consumers and manage those customer relationships. Acquirers connect merchants to the network and enable them to take card payments. Our goal is to offer all payment stakeholders, be they consumers, merchants, or banks, the widest array of secure, technologically advanced products to meet their needs, which is a good place to begin the discussion about the current payments landscape. First, I'd like to assure you that the plastic card in your wallet is not going to disappear anytime soon. However, consumers want access to new payment technologies, all of which are part of a movement away from cash. The first evolution of this is contactless card payments, or tap-and-go features like MasterCard Contactless. The next evolution will use this same technology, but incorporate it into a mobile device, or what is now commonly referred to as mobile payments. These transactions can take advantage of the same security as chip and PIN transactions. There has been limited rollout thus far with mobile payments in Canada, but you should begin to see the technology being used more frequently this year. With all these innovations, however, it is important to remember that consumers and merchants will continue to have choice. Mobile payments will not be forced on consumers or merchants. There are some other innovations worth noting in this move away from cash, like replacing government checks with more efficient mechanisms like direct deposit to prepaid cards, something Canada is pursuing. In sum, Canada is on the cusp of some fascinating payments developments that offer great opportunities for merchants, consumers, and governments. Next, I'll turn to global trends with payments, and one clearly stands out: the move to a cashless society. Cash is an inefficient and expensive payment instrument, yet it is still used for about 85% of the world's transactions. We believe the value proposition of moving to a digitally based system is profound, and not just for traditional stakeholders like consumers and merchants, but also for governments. I've already mentioned the example of replacing government checks. Another big issue is around the black market. Eliminate cash and you could potentially put a severe constraint on criminal activity, such as drug trafficking, money laundering, and tax evasion. There are some remarkable stories of countries that are primed to take a leap forward in payments as a result of technological advances. Take the Congo, for example, where the share of the population with a bank account is a fraction of a percent, yet there are tens of millions of mobile phones. For many developing countries like this, a smartphone could become the entry point to the formal banking system, as well as a mechanism for the delivery of government benefits and even a means of providing identification of the population. That is just a snapshot, but you can begin to see the potential. Likewise, I will share a glimpse of the opportunities for merchants and consumers in this changing landscape. Consider some of our own work in the area of mobile payments. For example, our MasterPass service allows consumers to make purchases online with a single click without having to enter their credit card information every time. This offers convenience for consumers and increased sales for merchants, since we know a major concern is abandoned sales as consumers work their way through a more complicated online checkout process. There are also infinite possibilities for merchants to offer couponing or loyalty programs tied to a mobile device. Finally, let me turn to virtual currencies. We are concerned that Bitcoin and other unregulated virtual currencies present very real risks of money laundering, criminal activity, and consumer harm. Unlike payment card transactions funded by and settled in fiat currency, virtual currency transactions are today largely unregulated. This means no consumer protections, no disclosures, no error resolution, no dispute rights, and no lost or stolen protection. Also, the operators in the virtual currency world are not covered by many existing regulatory frameworks. If they become insolvent or abscond with a consumer's Bitcoin, there is generally no government insurance scheme. Moreover, since the value of Bitcoin fluctuates wildly, consumers and merchants that choose to transact in Bitcoin gamble on whether they pay or receive fair value. When you consider these factors, it is apparent that part of Bitcoin's current appeal is the inability of many law enforcement to trace its transactions, and this anonymity has made it a payment method of choice for illegal transactions, along with cash. In a similar light, unregulated virtual currencies present a significant challenge for tax authorities, since they are like electronic cash, and even if the record of a transaction can be recovered, the identities of the parties and the ability to collect a tax may remain elusive. In fact, some of the benefits of moving to a cashless society that I described earlier, like cracking down on the black market, are actually undermined if virtual currencies remain unregulated. In closing, MasterCard believes that there are great benefits of moving to a cashless society. However, it is important that the confidence in digital payments not be undermined by virtual currencies operating outside any legal or regulatory framework. We believe the bottom line for any payment method, including virtual currency, is that it must be safe, stable, and reliable for consumers. It must provide an accepted value guarantee without exposure to significant fluctuation and risk, and it must offer all the basic protections that consumers have come to expect. As you move forward with your study, I strongly encourage you to keep in mind the difference between digital transactions tied to a real currency and backed by a regulatory framework that provides consumer protection and addresses prudential risk, such as payment card transactions that operate on the MasterCard network, and digital transactions involving unregulated virtual currencies. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I'm interested, Ms. Heyman, in your remarks, you indicate that, and I'm going to quote you directly, having had the benefit of your presentation, that like cracking down on the black market are actually undermined if virtual currencies remain unregulated. So am I understanding from that that you picture that virtual currencies will continue to grow and what you are recommending is regulation for them?
We're not sure, frankly, whether or not they will continue to grow, but the trend is that they're continuing to grow. So at the end of last year, there were less than 1 million holders of Bitcoin. And I don't have a source for this statistic, but I've heard colloquially that today more than 7 million people hold Bitcoin. And so in less than a year, it's grown quite substantially. And so sort of in the absence of regulation, it's going to continue to grow in an uncontrolled manner. And so, yes, we believe that it should be regulated.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to my list of questions, starting with Senator Blatt, to be followed by Senator Campbell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for those presentations. It was very helpful. So I'd like to step back, if I may, and start, sir, with your very powerful end to your comment where you talk about that you want to play a critical role in enabling commerce in the future. Do you believe that digital currencies have a role in commerce in the future?
I do think, and I certainly think most of the folks around this table would agree that there is a tremendous amount of buzz with regards to virtual currencies out there today. There are also a lot of unknowns, which is what we're trying to tackle, and you are in your good work that you're doing with this committee. I think it's too early to say how they are going to evolve. Should they be regulated? I can say that we're certainly watching this space to see how it does evolve. I could say that we are certainly actively watching this space. And we do want to be a part of the digitization of commerce, and we certainly are. But today, the fact that there is so little consumer protections attached to virtual currencies is a concerning element for us.
Okay, so you would say if we were going to do something, you would say, Senate, note consumer protection, right? That's your recommendation.
Consumer protection is a big issue.
What else? What are the other issues that you think?
I think virtual currencies certainly have the potential to move AML meters where they shouldn't be.
I don't know what that means.
Anti-money laundering. There's really no way to track this stuff, so I think that's something that
We're told clearly that there is a way to track this stuff. That's the evidence before this committee. So we'll just leave it at that.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
To track virtual currencies. Okay.
We're told that there's a digital footprint which is actually very easy to track. So we're told.
Okay.
Okay. So if that, let's assume that for the sake of discussion, what else do we need to worry about?
I think Senator Black, the primary one in our mind right now is consumer protection.
Okay, that's great. And Ms. Heyman, do you agree with that?
We believe consumer protection is extremely important, but we also believe that, well, yes, we know it can be tracked. The issue is that it's tracked in kind of an anonymous way right now. So in the U.S., these entities that facilitate transactions in Bitcoin have recently been brought under the money services business regime, and we believe that that's a good idea.
Okay.
It imposes obligations to perform know your customer checks, and in the U.S. checking against our OFAC list and things like that, that we believe will really make the currency a lot safer. And in addition to quote trackable from a digital perspective, it'll be trackable in a personal perspective.
Anything else you'd suggest that we should look at?
Those are the main things that we
Thank you
think
very
we
much.
should look at.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Black. Senator Campbell.
Thank you very much for coming today. I have both MasterCard and Visa, so I'm neutral on this. And unlike many here, I remember when there weren't credit cards, or at least they wouldn't give me one. And now we've seen this transition where we went from essentially a total cash society into one where we now have established credit card and that type of way of doing business. I have to tell you right off the top, I'm amazed at your figures on cyber attacks. That just absolutely stuns me at the numbers, and I'm glad that you're able to do that, and I'm glad that all of you are continuing to do that. If we're at 85% cash now, where things are done in cash, and we do believe that in the future Bitcoin and currencies like this are something that we will be dealing with, I take in a realistic manner. Do you think this is going to pull from the 85% cash, or is this going to pull from the 15% that I assume is in MasterCard, Visa, and in other American Express, in other cards? I would address that to you, Mr. Colfer.
Sure. So just to be clear, I just want to understand the question, Senator Campbell, if I could. So 85% cash, and your question is, which will, as Bitcoin potentially usage increases, will it pull from the 85% cash or the 15%?
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's going to be completely demographic dependent. I'd say it's hard. It would be very difficult to give a one number as a response. I think it would be completely based on the demographic that is using those payment tools. I
actually agree. So Bitcoin is popular amongst, a bunch of different groups of people. So we have criminals, who are trying to evade the law, and those transactions will remain part of the cash transactions, I would guess. There are investors who speculate and who buy, and then with the gains that they make on their investment, hedge fund types, they sometimes buy expensive things, as you've seen Richard Branson in the news, buying stuff with Bitcoin. And then there's people in emerging markets who are using Bitcoin because they don't trust their banking system. And so those may replace some cash transactions, but I mean, this is all just my speculation.
If I could just, one more. The difficulty we have is that we're trying to look into the future in an area which is groundbreaking, quite frankly, from the point of view of consumers. Do you have any idea, for instance, it's gone from, what did you say, 1 million to 7 million?
Approximately, yes.
Approximately. In how long a period of time, anecdotally?
A year.
A year.
That increase was in about a year.
So
but again, that's just anecdotal evidence.
So clearly this has to be heavily on the radar of your companies.
It is. We're watching it very closely.
Do you have any idea? Well, you don't. I'm trying to get some idea or some grasp of when we can. Where's the tipping point here? At 7 million now, and if we say that every year it doubles, what's the tipping point at which point when Bitcoin really is whacking into the cash market and into your market? Is it going to depend on when it's regulated to the point where people trust it, or are the people going to take control of it as it goes along and try to run it themselves?
I think one of the data points you could watch is the one that was shared by Ms. Haymond, the other one, which is what we would call cards in market. So there's 7 million apparently Bitcoin users, if you will, I think, globally. But where can you take those Bitcoins to buy something? That's the other data point that I would certainly keep your eyes on. So acceptance is a critical data point to watch.
Do you see it waning?
I think it's too early to tell whether it's waxing or waning. I think Derek makes an excellent point that one of the drivers of the growth of these digital currencies will be the acceptance of them. Where can consumers who hold these units of exchange actually be able to use them? If we see acceptance grow at locations where they can use these in their day-to-day lives, certainly we will see, I think, the speed pick up on that. And I would say that the majority of the attention should be shown on where can these Bitcoins be used, where can they be accepted, and then certainly that will be a good measure of where it's going to be going in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. Senator Ringett, to be followed by Senator Tkachuk.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, you know that the federal government has the constitutional responsibility to regulate currency. So, last summer, I remember getting a Visa magazine, and the cover was Visa, a digital currency. So both of you have indicated that virtual currencies should be regulated. Then I am assuming, rightly so, that the logic would be that Visa and MasterCard should also be regulated as a currency.
I don't recall, and we can certainly look at the minutes, that I ever stated that virtual currencies should be regulated.
Well, maybe Madame Amon?
We believe that virtual currencies should be regulated, but we do not believe that MasterCard is in itself a currency. We allow people to transact safely and securely in fiat currency. That's what we do. We're definitely not a currency, and we've definitely never represented that we're a currency.
Oh, this is interesting. This duality of point of view. Madame Eamon, you've stated that cash is an inefficient and expensive instrument. From what evidence do you make that statement?
So we believe that it is. I don't.
No. If you make a statement, it's because you have some evidence to corroborate your statement.
We do. We have a tremendous amount of evidence that shows how expensive it is for governments and, people to transact in cash. There's loss of, of money.
And
There's how much.
it is more
there's the cost-
expensive than using credit card.
Yes, it's more expensive than using credit cards or checks. We could provide you with separate materials that evidence this. Yes,
I would love that if you could table that with the clerk, because
we'd
this
be happy
committee,
to provide that.
this committee 2 years ago received from the Bank of Canada a very extensive study that the Bank of Canada expertise has done, and showed that the least expensive payment method was cash.
We have evidence that
So I'm
shows the contrary.
I'm quite surprised at your finding. So you will table
Yes.
these documents.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, we also, this committee, in previous meeting on this study, we received evidence from Bitcoin users that, first of all, the entire virtual currency phenomena had been triggered by people that were absolutely tired of bank user fees and credit card fees. What is your response to that?
We haven't heard anything of that sort. So we've heard that people who didn't like government and didn't like regulation and didn't like to be known because they liked to be anonymous sought out to create an alternative currency that was not a fiat currency, where they could transact anonymously. That's as far as we understand it.
From my perspective, I don't think I'd want to speculate as to the intents behind why or how someone developed a virtual currency.
Well, we've had witnesses on this study, so if you want to look at the committee
The record?
records,
Sure.
you will see that this has been said to us. So it's an issue. Trying to get too much out of people has some consequences some of the times. And some people have taken it into their hands and are being very creative and very innovative, and have gone into the virtual currency market. And that's the from my perspective, I see that whether it's Bitcoin or eventually another virtual currency, it's an innovative product, just like 40 years ago when Visa and MasterCard started. The Fantastic Plastic was an innovative product. So you'll have to face competition, and you know what? From my perspective, I'm kind of happy about that. Thank you.
Senator Ranget. Senator Tkachuk, to be followed by Senator Massicotte.
My questions are a little more philosophical. We've had lots of testimony about virtual currency, and I still don't understand how it works. And so fairly good experts in the field in front of us who know digital currency very well. So I understand cash because the government backs it. I understand credit cards because my bank backs it, right? My bank says, I'll give you credit of up to $30,000. That's it. And then the credit card companies figure out how to move that credit around. So I can go to a store and I can use that credit. I can And then as long as I pay at the end of each month, I can continue using the card. So I kind of got that. But why do people accept a virtual currency, and how can you regulate something that's virtual? Like, I still don't understand how the Bitcoin is worth more money because some computer guy back somewhere in the United States is producing these Bitcoins that are being transacted, but with no one backing it. In other words, there's no barter here. It's simply based on faith. I don't know. I don't understand how it works. Maybe you can explain why people accept it.
But you can try again if you
Well,
want. Yeah.
actually, witnesses, if they say they understand, they're not telling you the truth either. Go ahead.
So is the question, the larger question, how does it all come together
Yeah,
and work?
like how-
So these are very interesting times. Every morning there will be a headline that changes your perception of what happened yesterday and where the market was yesterday. For that reason, it's very, very difficult to speculate as to where it will be tomorrow or even how it works today. And for those very reasons, we have challenges with regards to the consumer protections that we think are going to be an issue that I was mentioning to Senator Black. But to have a crystal ball as to how it will all pan out tomorrow, virtual currencies, it's very, very, very difficult. I know how they work conceptually, and I know the Bitcoin example, but there are about 13 other virtual currencies that consumers can engage with on any given day. So it's a tough one. It's a tough nut to crack. I know that didn't answer your question, Senator Tkachuk.
Yeah, Tkachuk.
Sorry, Tkachuk.
There you go.
But it's really a tough one to answer.
Yeah. Why don't you take a crack at it, Senator?
Sure. So to your question about, well, how do you regulate something that's virtual?
Yeah.
So we believe that, part of the problems here are that it's, the value question aside, because I frankly can't answer the value question. I mean, basically there's a scarcity of these resources. They've created something that they can only mine a certain number of, and as that number, decreases, it becomes harder and harder, and you have to kind of give more computing power to get one of these Bitcoins out. And so because of their general scarcity, I mean, they actually trade more like they trade on an exchange, more like a commodity. And so that's the way I understand the value. But to your question on the regulation, we believe in consumer choice, and the fact that these are popping up everywhere, consumers may choose, we believe they will probably choose some consumers may choose to own these and hold these and use these, and we believe that those consumers should be protected, and so should merchants. And so what we think is that if you take the anonymity out of the equation and treat these exchanges, the entities that conduct the translation of this stuff into fiat stuff, we think that will take a lot of the risk out of the system. Number one, it'll help to make a lot of these currencies less attractive to the underbelly that's currently attracted to them. If you put, and to Senator Rigette's point earlier, yes, there are less fees associated with these right now, but there are also less protections. And if you regulate this, I mean, this is just my own personal opinion. I'm not speaking for MasterCard here. I think that probably what I guess would happen would be that there would be more fees associated with them, and again, making it sort of a less attractive option to the underbelly, to the criminal element and stuff like that, and also to entities that are looking for like a really cheap no-frills solution. I don't think that there should be a cheap no-frills solution. I think that there should be consumer protections, even if that comes at some cost.
Thank you. Senator Massicotte, to be followed by Senator Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask Senator Tkachuk whether he got a full answer, but I'll be polite and go on with our witness. Let me I figured that much. We can try again next witness if you want, yeah. On the cryptocurrency, you talk about there's no tracking and you talk about regulation. There is some countries are basically saying the point of focus is with the miner, the dealers, if you wish. If you did that, which obviously they can get historical information because if you require that, would that be a solution to the regulatory? Is that good enough, or must we go to every person dealing with the cryptocurrency?
Are you talking about the people who actually
The regulation,
mine it?
in other words, to avoid the whitewashing of money, to avoid the abuse, to avoid all this other stuff. Would that be good enough if you simply regulate the miner, the one producing the cryptocurrency?
I personally don't think so. I mean, I think that the exchanges need to be regulated, where that transfer of money is happening, the ones that kind of look like they're performing a banking-like function. I think it's unfair, also, frankly, that they're not regulated as banks. They're performing a conversion from, something that's not a fiat currency into a fiat currency. And just like any other, a commodities exchange, a trading exchange, any sort of currency exchange is regulated, these so too should be regulated.
Okay. You realize that there is a lot of exchanges that's not heavily regulated, depending upon who the players are, obviously. Look at the institutional investors on the stock market. They have their own exchange, which is not regulated because they're sophisticated investors. But anyways, let me go to the other reason. One of the reasons they say cryptocurrency has a good future is that many countries do not have a very good banking system, who do not, they apparently they can use some form of transfer, but it's very, very expensive. Mm-hmm. Many parts of Africa, is there value there? And you often talk about the merits of your system. Can that be used in those poor countries? Do they have a banking system? Do they have a bank account? How do you avoid that issue?
Oh no, we actually think it could have value in those circumstances. But again, kind of today, what we're encouraging is for there to be a framework, a regulatory framework, where amongst all governments around this. That's all, so that it's sort of on an equal playing field with other similar types of currency.
Yeah. But I presume you're not simply attempting to make it so burdensome to increase your cost to become less competitive compared to your
No,
system?
of course not. There's probably innovative ways to do that, but just sort of leaving it to its own devices we don't think is the right way.
Okay. Can you offer a solution to those poor countries where the banking system is, where people don't have bank accounts? Could they use Visa? Could they use MasterCard?
Again, we don't have a currency, although we work on lots of innovative ideas every day. We have a whole research and development arm that works on things like
There are
that.
some really innovative ways to provide fundamental banking services to the developing world. The democratization of payments has been a long-time focus of Visa's. And I think Ms. Hammond was saying earlier about mobile devices being very, very prolific in a lot of those countries. We've done a lot of work in the developing world in the democratization of payments, where you've got a good chunk of the population that does not have fundamental banking capabilities, the ability to send money, the ability to save money. But a really good proportion of those folks do have a mobile device, and that provides for a fantastic conduit for the democratization of payments. We actually we acquired a company in South Africa called Fundamo about 3 years ago that has done some fantastic work in the developing world with regards to using those mobile devices and allowing people to save money when they couldn't and send money when they couldn't. So I think there are ways, innovative ways beyond digital currencies and virtual currencies that you can assist the developing world in what we refer to as the democratization of payments.
Could you just briefly describe me, in other words, let's take a poor African country where the person does not have a bank account. How would they use, if you wish, the company you just bought in South Africa?
Sure.
How would that work for them to make the payments?
So
How
it's
do
a
they
really
get the cash?
it's a real fundamental technology play. It's called SMS, short message service. Another word for it is text messaging. So the use case where it used to be that if I was within one of those developing nations and I wanted to send 10 local currency units across town to my cousin, the use case used to be I would hand 11 local currency units to a cab driver or a bus driver. They would take one and deliver 10. Now what you can do through SMS or text messaging is you can quite literally send a text message to the recipient with the number attached and how much you would like to send, which is then tethered to a bank account, and you're sending money digitally. and allowing for capabilities and features and functions that just didn't exist before.
If there's no bank account, can it work?
A lot of them are tied to mobile network operator bank accounts, so yeah, they can work without, sorry, not bank accounts, but mobile network operator accounts.
Okay.
So they can actually exist without what we would refer to as a standard bank account.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Massica. Senator Bellemare, to be followed by Senator Tanis.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a question concerning your attitude faced with digital currency, which is more of a method of payment, according to all of the analysis we've had from the other witnesses we've heard, because it's not a unit in and of itself, it's more of a payment method, and so it's more of a commodity, as was mentioned. With Bitcoins, it's not like a credit card, and we know that you're quite concerned about the future of Bitcoin and how it's going to evolve relative to your own strategies, but Bitcoins, at the end of the day, are not credit. Now, you offer credit, you have credit cards. And so, somewhere in there, there's a development strategy with your users, etc. So, my question is, well, we've been told that the technology behind Bitcoin is incredible technology, which reduces transaction costs, particularly at the international level. And the younger generation might be tempted to use this product. And that's having an effect on the market for monetary transactions. Why are you not investing in this area? Why wouldn't you invest in this area of digital currency? You could, at that time, offer services, complementary services. So I'd like to hear your reaction to that, because if we look at digital currency as being, you look at it as being something that's completely the opposite of your own business model. But if one day you were to decide to use that technology, for example, to develop other payment methods, easier ones, particularly at the international level, is that something you could envision? Do you have you looked at that? That's the basic thrust of my question.
We look at lots of different companies every day, and of course, I mean, the reason I have the knowledge I have is that we've obviously been out there talking to a lot of these companies. Obviously, we've not invested in any of them, and we're not currently considering investing in any of them, but it's definitely, again, I don't think that we would make a move like that unless and until the currency or the protocol or whatever you want to call it is regulated. So if there are consumer protections and it's not anonymous and there's KYC and they're able, we're able to track the transactions, we do believe that there are a lot of innovative aspects to this. We like that it's low cost. We like that it's fast. We like that it's frankly innovative and, as you mentioned, different than our business. But I don't think that we would even consider taking a step like that unless it was recognized by government.
Les gens des Bitcoin.
The Bitcoin people told us that, well, at least some of them have told us, that they would like to have regulation or legislation Now, if that were the case, would you consider investing in that if it were legislated or regulated?
And I'm not the corporate development person. Okay. No, but we actually do look at virtually, no pun. We look at virtually everything. And so if the conditions were right, I wouldn't actually say there was anything we wouldn't consider investing in if it made sense for our business and, from a policy perspective, if it made sense for us.
And certainly from our perspective, we actively invest in innovative companies like Fundamo, the one I was just mentioning, but I think there's some elements that you need to have before you really actively pursue those considerations, and things like scale, things like security, efficiencies. those are things that we would really want to focus on. And it's those three areas specifically are areas, certainly, and also consumer protection are areas right now where virtual currencies, you can't check those boxes right now.
Thank you. I have a quick intervention by Senator Tkachuk, who would like a clarification.
Yeah,
Quickly.
I do. In response to Senator Belmar's question on the currency itself and your investment, you said that unless it's recognized by government. By recognized, do you mean backed by government? What do you mean by recognized by government?
So no, I didn't mean backed by government. I don't think it would actually ever really be backed by
That's what I
government.
thought,
I think
but-
there would be a framework around it where governments would acknowledge it in an official kind of way, and again, take away some of what we think are the key risks present in it.
Thank you. Senator Tanis to ask his first question as a new member of the Banking Committee, to which we welcome him.
I'm going to show my
be
ignorance
followed by
right off
Senator
the bat.
Green.
Thank you, Chair. And following up a little bit on Senator Belmar, but maybe a bit more bluntly because you're experts and we're here to listen to experts. Is this a fad? Is this what I like to call a dumb idea whose time has come? Is it, in your opinion, will this go the way of the Dutch tulip bulb craze of 18-something or other? And we'll all be looking at this at some point in the future. That's kind of number one. And I appreciate that it will not be the official Visa opinion or MasterCard opinion, but you're experts in your own rights, and I'd be interested to know what you think. And secondly, assuming that it isn't, how difficult would it be for your organizations to replicate exactly what is being done by, say, Bitcoin? Is there any kind of secret sauce that they have that you couldn't replicate quickly, and therefore you would need to, if you decided to get in it, buy versus just build it using your own infrastructure, your own regulatory systems, and so on?
So the first question on the FAD, Senator, consumers and merchants want scale, they want security, and they want efficiencies. And those are our core focuses at Visa. This will not answer your question, but I would not want to speculate as to whether this virtual currency, Bitcoin, or any of the virtual currencies out there are a fad or not. Time will tell. It's early days. With regards to replicating technologies and protocols and standards that seem to be in place by those virtual currencies, that in itself would require a whiteboard and many engineers, and we don't have either. Well, maybe we have some engineers, but I don't see a whiteboard. My point is, it's a great question, but I wouldn't want to speculate on that one either, Senator.
Are you going to be braver?
So, I mean, I'm not going to speculate, but I'll give you some facts. So, we also think that payments should be safe, simple, and smart. And, I am not sure whether or not this is a fad. I do know that a lot of people are interested in this, and there's a lot of buzz. And I think that it's something that we all need to pay some attention to, as you all are doing here now. I mean, we are extremely active in our innovation. We have patents in this area. That's public on the record. We have, United States patents, in digital currencies, not because we plan to exploit them now and, introduce a MasterCard digital currency or anything like that, but just because, sort of for the sake of innovation, we do. And if we want, I don't know exactly if the patents that we have in the area would replicate Bitcoin, but if we wanted to do things in digital currency, yes, we have patents in that area.
Thank you.
After an excellent question like that, you're certainly entitled to a follow-up. If you would wish.
I'll rest. Thank
You'll
you, sir.
rest. Senator Green.
Thank you very much.
First
I've got
round.
kind of a follow-up, actually. So, given that most of your testimony here has been about creating regulatory framework to enable Bitcoin to be more secure and to happen? And given your patents, can we assume that you think that Bitcoin or a virtual currency is a continuing and permanent part of the currency landscape?
You know, we believe it's an important innovation, and that, you know, different forms of it will probably continue to evolve. Again, I don't know. Not that I don't want to speculate. I mean, it's just speculation on my part. You know what?
Sure.
You know what's going to happen.
Sure.
But I think that, again, people are very intrigued by this idea. There are good aspects of it. Again, it's low cost, it's quick, you know, and it is trackable if you track it the right way, and if you know. So yes, I personally think that things like this are going to continue to pop up.
Sure, that's good. I think that's what we believe too. Can you? Yes, this is all again in the realm of speculation, but can you imagine a time? You know, when you go to a restaurant, or the server at the end brings you a mobile device, and you put your card in, American Express or Visa or MasterCard or a debit card or whatever you want. Can you imagine that device, assuming that Bitcoin or a virtual currency achieves the protections that enable it to be accepted? Can you imagine a time when Bitcoin will also be an option to pay on the same device that you use for your cards?
I mean, I can imagine a lot of different ways that could actually happen. I mean, if it's regulated, you know, perhaps we would decide to have it run over the MasterCard rails. You know, perhaps we, you know, and then there would be the whole, you know, great standards and protections that MasterCard provides. I mean, sure, if it kind of, it could become a separate network. I mean, there's a lot. I feel like there's a lot of different ways that it could go. But a lot of that depends on, you know, actions of governments like yourself, and like the United States, and China has bowed out for now. I mean, it all depends on sort of the way it grows up and what happens. But I think, yes, I think that people could pay with it. Do I think it'll be personally? Do I think it'll be a primary way that people pay? Probably not. I think, I think it will have specific use cases. I think it's particularly useful for P2P. It's particularly useful for business payments. I mean, there's things where it makes, to me, this is just my own personal opinion, not speaking for MasterCard. I think there are use cases where it makes more sense.
Yeah.
That's all. And so I don't really think that regular people anytime soon would be paying for their dinner, you know, at the table in Bitcoin.
Our chairman is not a regular person, so I mean. A quick last question. You mentioned China. Why have they decided to bow out?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just know that they have said that their banks cannot transact in it.
Okay, good. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Green.
You're welcome.
To our panel, on behalf of every member of the committee, I'd like to express our great appreciation. You've been very, very helpful in our ongoing study. Thank you. We will suspend for 3 minutes and then reconvene. Thank you.
Thanks.
Senate Committee on Banking, Trade, and Commerce back to order. Before we move forward, I do want to advise the committee that I have received a written declaration from one of our members to which I have responded as follows, and I would like to have recorded in the minutes, please. Senator Tanis has made a written declaration of private interest regarding Bill S-202, an act to amend the Payment Card Networks Act, credit card acceptance fees, and in accordance with Rule 15-7, the declaration shall be recorded in the minutes of the proceedings of the committee, and he shall absent himself from discussion on this bill. Thank you.
And I'm with Senator Green.
Today, in our second hour, the committee is holding its third meeting on Bill S-202, an act to amend the Payment Card Networks Act, credit card acceptance fees, which was introduced by our colleague, Senator Ringett. And senators will recall that the committee began its study on May the 29th, 2014, by hearing from Senator Ringett, the Department of Finance, the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, and the Competition Bureau of Canada. At the second meeting on June the 19th, we heard from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Retail Council of Canada, the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation, and the BC Wildlife Federation. Today, we will hear from the two payment card networks designated in the legislation, namely Visa and MasterCard. Representing Visa in this second hour is Mr. Robert Livingston, President, and Brian Weiner, Vice President, Product and Strategy. And from MasterCard, Mr. Don LeBoeuf, Head of Customer Delivery, Canada. I will now turn the floor over to Mr. Livingston, to be followed by Mr. LeBoeuf. Mr. Livingston, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Senator Guernsey, and good afternoon, everyone. My name, as was mentioned, is Rob Livingston, and I'm the president of Visa Canada. With me is Brian Weiner, who leads our product and strategy function and has led our interchange function since 2006. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I would like to use this time to speak to three things: the payments industry in Canada today, how interchange works, and the impact Bill S-202 would have on consumers. Canada's payment industry is characterized by more choice and innovation today than ever before. The range of non-traditional players continues to expand. Telecommunications companies, mobile handset manufacturers, social media outlets, and technology startups are all entering the payments industry here. Global competitors such as American Express, PayPal, and China UnionPay continue to grow, and don't forget Canada's Interac, which has almost a third of the Canadian payments market. Together, they offer a growing number of options for consumers and merchants. These are the hallmarks of a healthy, competitive, and innovative environment. Equally important, initiatives such as the Code of Conduct for the credit and debit card industry have amplified the voice of all stakeholders in setting the ground rules for our industry. This fact is relevant to our discussion, as we believe this and other government initiatives have superseded this effort to regulate payments. As you know, the Code of Conduct governs many aspects of the relationships among parties to the payment system and is currently under revision by the Department of Finance to improve and expand its scope further. While Visa believes that our system has served Canada extremely well, we understand the need to balance the interests of the expanding number of parties with a stake in how that system works. With that in mind, we are currently working with government, merchants, and all other stakeholders to develop and refine this voluntary mechanism to address existing and emerging areas of concern. We believe the code has worked well. We committed to it in 2010, and we remain committed to it today. I would now like to make a few comments about interchange, an economic mechanism that is both fundamental to the payment industry, but is often misunderstood. Visa's interest in setting interchange rates is to maintain the balance in the system. If interchange rates are set too high, merchants will stop accepting cards. If interchange rates are set too low, issuers will go uncompensated for the value they deliver to consumers and merchants, and the features that attract consumers and encourage them to spend will be diminished. Interchange is not the price that the merchant actually pays to accept electronic payments. Merchants pay what's called a merchant discount rate. That rate is negotiated with their acquiring bank or payment processor and will include other costs beyond interchange. And importantly, interchange is not a Visa revenue stream. Let me now touch briefly on the potential consumer impacts of S202. The kind of regulation contained in this bill has been tested in Australia and elsewhere. The results, we believe, are harmful and had unintended consequences for all parties. In Australia, where caps on interchange were imposed with the intention that the price of goods would go down, consumers have not seen the savings. In fact, the Reserve Bank of Australia itself has recognized that regulation has led to increased costs for consumers with no corresponding reduction in retail prices. The RBA concluded that, and I'm quoting here, lower interchange fees in the MasterCard and Visa credit card systems have resulted in a reduction in the value of rewards points and higher annual fees, increasing the effective price of credit card transactions facing many consumers. And, another quote, no concrete evidence has been presented regarding the pass-through of savings from merchants to consumers. I would also like to address the studies that were tabled recently by Senator Ringuette. The paper prepared by David Shapiro is notably silent on the question of the overall effect on consumers. It's narrowly focused on interchange. It does not analyze consumers' increased costs or reduced benefits, which is the only way to determine the net consequences of that legislation to consumers. The Senator also submitted a paper by David Evans, which examines the effect of U.S. debit regulation on consumers. Evans does address both consumer savings and consumer costs, and he concludes that consumers experienced a $22 billion net loss from regulation, broadly defined. This demonstrates that regulation leaves consumers worse off in real terms. I believe my time is about to end, so to quickly sum up. Canada's payment industry is working as a vibrantly competitive market should, with new players and technologies all seeking consumer and retailer preference. Differences among its stakeholders have been worked through or are being worked through via the Code of Conduct. There is no evidence, economic or otherwise, to establish that regulation is necessary. Regulation, we believe, will only harm consumers to the benefit of retailers, and none of the evidence we have seen would show otherwise. Finally, I just want to reiterate that Visa has and will continue to work with government to address merchant concerns through measures that adequately consider the effects and consequences for all stakeholders in the payment system. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak here today, and we welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. LeBoeuf.
Thank you for the opportunity to discuss Bill S202, which seeks government intervention in the market to make pricing decisions on issues involving multiple private sector stakeholders. We believe this is a mistake and runs counter to past government positions on financial sector regulation that are focused on ensuring competition, choice, and transparency. I want to focus for a moment on those traditional values before getting to the unintended consequences of price regulation. Let me start with choice. It is important to remember that every merchant makes a choice to accept credit cards based on a cost-benefit analysis. Many do so because there are clear benefits like increased sales, guaranteed payment, reduced cash handling costs, and online sales, to name a few. The fact that so many merchants accept credit cards is because of the value they represent. The second key variable is competition. When a merchant decides to accept credit cards, at least 8 acquirers or merchant processors will compete for their business, largely based on price. There are also new entrants competing for merchant business outside of traditional channels like PayPal and Square. At a broader level, MasterCard is constantly evaluating our cost structure to determine how to improve the value proposition more effectively to compete with debit, cash, and checks. As a case in point, we reduce fees for low-value transactions, an important issue for low-ticket, high-volume businesses like fast food. Our tap-and-go payment option for such environments is much more efficient than cash and often cheaper than debit, and that shows the market at work. The third key variable is transparency, which has been greatly improved with the government's Code of Conduct. Merchants can now clearly understand their card acceptance costs through detailed monthly statements from their processors, thereby helping them better evaluate the value proposition offered. We believe there is a competitive market for payments built around choice, competition, and transparency, and the major risk of Bill S202 is that it will eliminate competition, replace sophisticated price decision-making with arbitrary government dictates, and lead to negative consequences for consumers and merchants. This is not to suggest that the payment system is perfect. MasterCard has heard the concerns about costs for merchants and government, and the last budget committed to address this. To that end, we are working with the government to reduce merchant costs while also protecting the interests of consumers. I cannot share further details at this time, but there are 2 broad aspects of the current discussions that I can highlight. First, the proposed solution is an industry initiative, not government intervention. We still believe in a market solution to this debate. Second, our focus will be always in balancing the interests of merchants and consumers. We are no further ahead if merchant interests are addressed but consumers are harmed. Therein lies the link back to S202. And let's look at Australia, since it's so often cited by proponents of price regulation, despite the well-documented negative impact on consumers and the payment system. First, when the Reserve Bank of Australia regulated fees, it expected but did not mandate that savings would be passed on to consumers. However, there is still no evidence that happened. We are pleased that the Canadian government has called on merchants to pass on savings to consumers, but international experience in Australia, UK, and many countries has proven that will not happen. The other reality in Australia was that price controls led to reduced revenue for card issuers, forcing reductions in card benefits and reduced availability of credit. Cardholder fees increased between 22 and 77%, costing consumers about $480 million annually. Finally, Amex, the most expensive acceptance option for merchants, was left out of the regulation, as it is in S202. That allowed Amex to increase its consumer benefit programs, while MasterCard and Visa were forced to cut theirs. As a result, more consumers switched to Amex, which ultimately increased the acceptance costs, the exact opposite outcome than the one that price regulations sought to achieve. A more recent example comes from the U.S., where Congress regulated debit card fees in 2010. The consumers paid on average 1.5% more for goods after the 50% cut in fees was implemented. Merchants, on the other hand, pocketed $8 billion in savings, while consumers faced new or higher fees for traditional banking services to offset the lost revenue. These examples show what will play out in Canada if government is given the power to set prices in the private sector. The most dangerous element of Bill S202 is that it seeks government intervention in a complex market to favor merchant interests above all other stakeholders. The others, and consumers most importantly, will feel the negative impacts. In contrast, when MasterCard sets prices, we have to consider the impact on all stakeholders, including merchants and consumers. Longer term, we continue to review our structures, improve the merchant value proposition for card acceptance, and as part of that, we've already reduced fees in several areas and are engaged with merchants to address their concerns and offer new innovations to improve their business. That is all the result of the market working rather than government regulation. Where tried, government price controls have failed. Therefore, we urge senators to vote against this bill and continue Canada's pro-market approach to the financial sector. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your presentations. Before I go to my list of senators with questions, I would like to tell you what's running through my mind. I think I've got it right. In 2010, a code of conduct for the credit and debit card industry of Canada was introduced by the government to promote merchant choice, transparency, and fairness in the credit market. And the government was confident that industry would adopt the code voluntarily, which it has done. But the minister at the time, the Minister of Finance at the time, said, and I quote, "We have the legal authority to regulate the industry if necessary," end quote, which as of yet has not been required. Next, in 2013, the Competition Tribunal found some of Visa and MasterCard's network rules had adverse effects on competition, resulting in higher costs to merchants. Then, in Budget 2014, tabled this past April, the government reiterated the need to lower credit card acceptance costs, and I quote directly from Economic Action Plan 2014, "Canada has among the highest credit card acceptance costs in the world," end quote. Now, from 2010 to 2014, it's been 4 years, and we've really seen no significant changes from industry, aside from lowering interchange rates on transactions under $10 and lowering commercial interchange rates. Let me be clear. Canadian merchants and consumers are expecting movement. Mr. Leboeuf, in your presentation, you told the committee that you are working with government to reduce merchant costs while also protecting the interests of consumers. You have talked about working with the government to reduce costs, and you have talked about how the solution is an industry initiative and not the place for government to intervene. To be frank, you've talked the talk, but I suspect what the committee wants to know is when you will walk the walk. And with that, I refer to my list of senators with questions, starting with Senator Black, to be followed by Senator Green. Senator Black.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for the contributions that you clearly make. I must say, though, I am skeptical about what I've read in the presentations you have today. I understand we all have vested interests. I all understand we need to advance them. But in line with the Chairman's comments, we're here to try and effect some kind of resolution that benefits Canadians. I did not have the advantage of reviewing the visa presentation in advance, but I did have the opportunity to review, Mr. LeBoeuf, your comments, and I would like to refer to them, if I may, and perhaps you can assist me. If you could turn to page 2, paragraph 2, where you indicate that we believe there is a competitive market for payments built around choice, competition, and transparency. Let's talk about choice and competition. The information that I have been provided, and I believe other members of this committee have been provided, is that 90% of the Canadian credit card market is controlled by Visa and MasterCard, both who have increased acceptance fees by 30% over the last year. Can you discuss with us, please, how that amounts to choice and competition in your mind?
Firstly, I'd like to address the assertion that our fees have gone up 30% in a single year. We haven't changed our pricing on interchange since April of 2009.
Thank you.
They have been stable with the exception of the interchange rates that we've reduced. So that's incorrect and it's misleading.
Thank you for pointing that out.
There's a lot of choice. How you focus on this from a consumer.
Do you control 90% of the market?
90% of the credit card market. You have to factor in debit. You have to add cash to that because cash is a legitimate competitor, if you will. I mean, we're looking to displace cash. And then there is checks, although used less by private folks as opposed to the government and businesses. So we compete with a lot of different entities, and now you've seen PayPal is operating. You've got Square that's operating in Canada now. Bitcoin is a small little side thing, but there are a number of choices that consumers and merchants have in whether they're going to use or accept certain payment types.
So your evidence is there are other players, but certainly you wouldn't suggest to me or to this committee that they are real competitors to Visa and MasterCard.
I would suggest Interac is a definite real competitor,
Very well.
Especially given the way Interac is constructed regulatory-wise. They are set to recover in a cost recovery model where their fees are artificially held low by the competition consent agreement. So Interac is absolutely a definite competitor, and so is Cash.
So you stand by your suggestion that there is real choice and competition?
Absolutely. I mean, we battle it out every day.
Okay.
Us, them, everyone else.
And Senator Black, if I can pipe in
Of course.
on the assertion around the 30% price increase. Visa, going back 6 years, 7 years, even before Visa became a public company, our weighted average interchange rate across the entire system was 1.59%, and today it's 1.65%. That's an increase of 4% over 6 years. I'm not sure where that 30%
No, and
number
I'm
comes
not
from.
either, but I'll find that out.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. No, thanks for pointing that out. Sir, if we can come back as well to the competitive market and your point about transparency, and help me. I understood that transparency really only exists because of the government's code of conduct that you have signed on to, that the transparency was forced upon you.
Well, the code of conduct, we adopted the code of conduct voluntarily. We've embedded in our rules because it was the right thing to do. I mean, certainly the government has the ability to regulate under the Payments Act, but it made perfect sense that we've always felt merchants should know more about their payment options, their costs, and understand when they're making a decision what those costs entail, whether it's the terminal price, whether it's the transaction fees, their merchant discount rate. And so with the code of conduct, it brought into line all of the acquiring processors that actually service the merchant community and ensured that there was a consistent, transparent divulging of information to merchants that they should clearly understand exactly what their acceptance costs by acceptance channel, by acceptance brand. It's given, frankly, them more information than they've ever had before, and I think that's a good thing.
Of course it's a good thing, but that was because the government of Canada encouraged your industry to do it.
To some degree, I'd agree with that.
Thank you very much.
Senator Black and I
Certainly.
I can't speak for MasterCard, but with respect to Visa, that statement does not hold true. Visa voluntarily put forward a publication of our interchange rates in advance of the Code of Conduct. In fact, we were proponents of that in the Code of Conduct, which was a collaboration among the entire industry.
Okay, thank you.
Just as a follow-up on that. I mean, as an industry, we've tried to communicate to merchants the value of payments, and, we put on our websites whatnot and do promotions, whatnot. But we are prohibited against price maintenance. So we can't influence what happens between the acquirer and the merchant. So the Code of Conduct was a good thing in that it prescribed exactly what needed to be told to merchants, something that we cannot do under our rules.
I see, okay.
So we're prohibited through price maintenance regulation.
Mr. Chairman, I have a few more questions. May I proceed? Thank you very much. Sticking with the statement in paragraph 2, you talk about the risks of Bill 202. And you're quite clear on this. You believe it will eliminate competition. How could that possibly be the case?
Well, it certainly favors it favors American Express, to be blunt, with them being left out of the. Well, I'm sorry if you don't agree, Senator, but it's been proven in other countries when you leave a competitor out of the equation, they are free to increase their product benefits to consumers and attract those consumers. And those cards carry a higher cost than our cards. The major risk that we're concerned about is that this does not balance the consumer equation. So when we look at interchange, we're very thoughtful about it because, as it was pointed out earlier, if our interchange rates are too high, merchants will not accept it. If they are too low, then we can't provide benefits for consumers to use a credit card. Less consumers, less benefit to the merchant. It's a very delicate equilibrium that you have to keep in mind. So if we go too high, merchants will not accept. And I think American Express has seen that. So if you go too high, you get less acceptance, less cardholders want your card. So it's a very delicate balance. And it's not in our self-interest to raise interchange rates, and have them skyrocket. It just doesn't serve our purposes.
We'll talk about that in a second, but you would agree with me that your statement that it would eliminate competition is a little extreme.
Well, it would reduce our competition. It would
might.
hamstring MasterCard, and I would assume
Thank
Visa.
you very much. Let's just talk about merchants and consumers. You talk about the negative consequences for merchants. Isn't that only that they'd be paying lower fees to you?
Negative
consequences to merchants. If 202 became the law and merchants had to pay less fees to you, what are the negative consequences on the merchants?
Well, specifically there's more negative consequences for consumers.
Let's talk.
Be absolutely
but
clear.
You talked about merchants, and I want to talk about merchants first.
And again, back to the negative consequences for merchants, as borne out in Australia, is that you are enabling a competitor, which already has the highest price of acceptance in the marketplace, to grow their consumer base and, in fact, raise the acceptance cost for those retailers by simply squeezing the balloon and moving those cardholders to a higher priced option for these merchants.
Okay. Your concern, though, is really, appropriately, your concern is for your firm, not so much for the merchants.
Well, we are always concerned about merchants, but I'm concerned for my firm. I'm concerned for the merchants and the consumers. It is a balance, and the consumers have to be brought into this.
Thank you very much. Your point on, I would point out that it's also been pointed out, and perhaps it's incorrect, that in Europe, they've had caps on credit card and acceptance fees for a long period of time, and indeed, in July 24 of 2013, a regulation was passed binding 28 countries in Europe to limit merchant fees to 0.2% for debit cards and 0.3% for credit cards. Do you agree that Canada is now the global outlier?
No, in fact, I would say Canada is a show of how the industry can work together with government to come to a resolution. So
But we have no resolution.
Well, as mentioned in the budget by the finance minister and in recent statements by the finance minister, he's made it very clear that this is a matter of months, not years. So the timing of this committee may be a little premature, but there are significant, efforts underway working with the government to resolve this issue, and it's a matter of months.
Our timing is not premature. We
Well-
have a bill before us that we are studying.
Yes, I understand that. Poor choice of words, sorry.
We would urge you to act with dispatch. Thanks very much.
Senator
Thank you.
Green, to be followed by Senator Tkachuk.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to let you know that I'm a conservative, and more than that, I'm an Eastern conservative as opposed to a Western conservative. Western conservatives tend to mistrust banks and large financial institutions. Eastern conservatives tend to love them, and if I don't love them, I certainly respect them. We've had a lot of testimony from all kinds of merchants associations and groups, and one of the issues that has arisen, which has grabbed my attention, is the issue of choice. Now, you've indicated that merchants don't have to have credit cards, that they can use cash. Well, in this day and age, if you want to tell somebody something, you have to offer more than cash. You have to offer credit cards or at least a debit card. You have to do that. So really to say that that's a choice that they have, to me, it's not really a choice. You say that they have choice amongst cards, but as you know, I'm sure, merchants are asked to take all the cards and feel pressure to take all the cards because it's a matter of competition for them. If their competitor takes all the cards, then he has to take all the cards. So I wonder if you could address that point and also answer the question as to whether, because a merchant pays the system different rates for different cards, depending on the reward points associated with the cards, that whether individuals who choose to have a lower priced card, or maybe they're not eligible for a card with a lot of reward points, are actually subsidizing the network on behalf of those who have bigger cards.
Well, first of all, there are a great number of merchants that accept credit cards because they've made that choice to do so. No one's obviously holding a gun to their head. And I'm quoting a senator from, I think it was 2010 when I was here last time. There are, according to Statistics Canada, 2.4 million businesses in Canada, and roughly 1 million of them accept MasterCard. So clearly some businesses have made a cost-benefit analysis that credit cards don't fit their business model. Others choose to accept them because that's what their consumers would like to pay with. That's the free market at work. The second point of your question was?
It was the cross-subsidization.
Cross-subsidization.
Yeah.
Certainly, MasterCard rules have always allowed merchants to discount for cash or other forms of payment if they chose to do so, or steer them to lower forms of payment. But when you're talking about an average transaction size, the difference between, say a core card and a premium card is really, at an average transaction, we're talking about pennies. And it's really opens up a Pandora's box for the merchant community, quite frankly, to if a consumer doesn't use one portion of their services, should they get a discount? If they, let's say they go to a hotel and they don't use the free Wi-Fi, should they be entitled to a discount on their core price that everybody pays? I mean, it goes on and on, but it's just not something that's, I think, feasible within the merchant community to parse out, you didn't step on my carpet, being facetious, but so I don't need my carpet cleaned, therefore I'm not going to pass the carpet cleaning cost to you. Or you didn't use an automated checkout, therefore you didn't use my staff, therefore you deserve a break on the price. It really is an issue at the merchant level. How would you change the pricing based on how much of their services they're using?
Senator Green, if I can jump in as well. There are, in addition to the 1.4 million merchants that Mr. Leboeuf mentioned that do not accept MasterCard or Visa, there are some very large merchants in Canada that have chosen not to accept one of these two brands. And in the cases that I would quote, such as Costco or such as No Frills, they don't accept Visa, they only accept MasterCard. And that's clearly an economic decision that they are making based off of competition between brands. On the second point, I would also just raise the concept that the offering of credit to consumers isn't just about interchange. There are many other factors to it, particularly around carrying debt, interest rates, etc. And cross-subsidization is a very complex matter that isn't simply univariate. It's not just one variable that's being brought into account.
One quick follow-up.
They charge interest and credit card
Senator
hold
Ouimet.
membership fees. You're mixing apple and oranges.
When
Senator
somebody
Green, just to conclude.
purchases a service or an object online, how do the fees work and pays for it with a credit card?
It works very much in the same way as a face-to-face transaction would work, where the merchant, the online merchant selling online, would pay a merchant discount rate to their acquiring bank or their payment processor, and then that acquiring bank or payment processor would forward the interchange on to the issuing bank that actually gave the credit card to the consumer.
Yeah, I expected that. Okay.
Senator Tkachuk.
I'm just
To
going
be
to
followed by the Deputy Chair of the Committee, Senator Review Payette.
I'm just going to ask a few questions because we're supposed to be trying to educate the public here as well. So, on a say $1,000 or $500 transaction at a retail store, what would the percentage that would and I give them my Visa card? What would the percentage cost be to the retailer on the average? You don't have to be specific, but on the average, what would the retailer have to pay? What percentage?
It's hard to, so I can speak to a rough average. There's a wide variety based off
I
of
understand
individual arrangements. It's going to be somewhere between $20 to $30 out of a $1,000 transaction.
So like 2%?
2 to 3%.
2 to
Remember,
3%.
the interchange rate for visas just around
and we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
And of that 2 to 3%, which is, by the way, the maximum is 3% in Europe and 2% on right. So how much would you be taking and how much would the bank be taking that backed up that credit card?
I can't go into the actual specifics of the financial arrangements between ourselves and the banks. We
I
don't
understand.
really release that, and I particularly wouldn't with him sitting next to me.
Yes.
But the banks, but the banks take the vast majority of that amount.
And so they would take, what, 60%, 70%, 50%, somewhere in that area?
A vaster majority.
A vaster majority,
Yes.
even like 80%. So of the 3% or the 2% we're talking about, 80% is going back to the issuer, or 70%, that actually said that Dave Tkachuk can spend up to $10,000 on this credit card that I'm issuing to him.
That's right.
Right? So just so that the people out there are clear, you're a small player in the total charge, and that there's probably 8, 10, I don't know how many banks competing for that credit card business.
That is
right?
true.
And
yes.
they could have different charges, right? Which would make it easier for the consumer to or for the retailer to take. In other words, there is competition amongst the banks. We're not talking Visa, MasterCard. We're talking the 8 banks or 9 banks or 10 banks in the country that are issuing credit cards and have to compete for that credit card business.
Right.
Part of the competition is to get retailers to accept it.
That's absolutely true. There's competition at 3 steps in this process. There's competition for the acquiring banks or payment processors to sign up merchants, and they're
Right.
competing on price and other factors. There's competition between Visa and MasterCard to have volume and merchant arrangements and issuer arrangements flow through our system. And there's competition between the issuing banks for the end consumer, saying, hey, take our product, it's got this feature, or that product.
Right. I want to say that I'm a Westerner who doesn't mind banks. My father was a retailer, and people forget. I think a lot of times people forget, or the present retailers forget. I would have loved that my father would have been able to have credit cards, because he used to extend credit to his customers on his own, and then they wouldn't pay him, and there was nothing you could do about it. There was this concept. He couldn't. As a customer today can take a credit card and go down to the bank that night and get cash for it. That becomes cash in his bank account, where before a check would take, I don't know, a week to transact sometime, and even longer, right? So and I actually am old enough to remember those days, so I know what it's like. So if there is government regulation on the cost of the transaction to the merchant, whose hide does it come out of? Your hide or the bank's hide? In other words, who are we regulating here?
MasterCard, I'll speak for MasterCard, but MasterCard makes no revenue directly off interchange. All we do is pass it from the acquirer to the issuer. We set the interchange rates in lieu of default bilateral rates that they can negotiate themselves. Right. We set a market rate and then go from there. So we make nothing off interchange. We make it off volume and transactions flowing through the system. So it's in our interest to get as many transactions, as much volume as possible. So if interchange is out of balance, we're actually hurting ourselves. It's the banks that are at the risk per se, and the bank's customers, that if interchange was regulated and artificially lowered, then the banks will have to make up that compensation by either cutting off credit to people on the margin, or they're going to have to raise the fees or curtail product benefits that consumers enjoy today. And again, all with the global experience where retailers have been shown time and time again not to pass those savings on to consumers. So while the idea is to lower the cost for retailers, they don't actually pass it on. It becomes a windfall for retailers, while consumers bear the brunt of the expense.
Just I have one more. I have just one little small question, just so I think it's really important for consumers to understand the breakdown of the fees. I think so. We don't say, well, it's Visa, MasterCard. There's a whole bunch of people piled onto this 2% or 3%, and there are. I had a situation once, and I hate bringing up a personal thing, but it was a situation where yes, it's a question. Good. It's a question, and it was I had rented a home in Florida, and the home was not satisfactory and wasn't what it was expected to be, and I had put a deposit on of $2,000 on that home for my holidays, right?
Question,
Who paid? Visa paid for the $2,000. I phoned Visa, told them my problem. Bang! I got a credit.
Right.
Who pays for that insurance? Is it the MasterCard and Visa, or the banks? No. Who pays for that?
It's the banks who pay for that. Your bank paid for that. It's Visa's policy to say that you have no fraud liability.
Right.
But it's actually the bank who is underwriting that.
The one who underwrites it, so they back me up.
And that's
even though I get a bad purchase, which happens to many consumers all the time.
It does, and that's part of the cost that the banks assume that are compensated for, if you will, by the interchange that they receive in the transaction.
Yeah.
Thank you. Senator Review-Payette, to be followed by Senator Massicotte.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, bienvenue.
Thank you, and welcome. If you don't mind, I will speak in French a little bit, because we do have people watching us in Quebec, and of course, in Quebec we also use our Visa and MasterCards. Just one little correction to make at the beginning. American Express, to the best of my knowledge, is available at Costco. To the best of my knowledge, it's the one place where, as an individual, we save on prices because we buy things in volume. So how do you explain that such a major chain like Costco uses the most expensive card available on the market? Can you explain to me why Costco would use that card? Why is that interesting for Costco? Were you asked to submit bids with Costco? Can you offer the same services as Amex? I'd like to know what's going on, because it's unique to have such a major retailer with such a high volume of marchandises that would have the most expensive card. Can you explain that to me?
Relationship negotiated directly with American Express, where they had what's called a co-brand card. So it was a Costco Amex card tied to their membership, and so there was an economic interest between the two parties. The contract came up for expiration, and Costco put their business up for tender. A number of institutions and organizations responded to their request for a proposal, and I'm pleased to say the MasterCard won the business. And American Express will no longer be accepted there, I believe, by the end of this year. That was, they're actually going to phase that out, American Express acceptance.
Donc, vous pouvez opérer à...
So you'll operate at a lower price than that what is generally charged. If you've won a competition, that means you've dropped your interchange fee. I'm not sure of the right word in French, but that means you've dropped your interchange fee. Did you drop your price as compared to what you would charge to, say, a corner store?
Of the agreement, but it was a very wide-scoping economic proposal that MasterCard made to business, as we would with any major retailer looking to get their business. And so it not just includes interchange, but a wide scope of different services that MasterCard was bidding on. So it was a larger package that we actually proposed.
Bon, ce qui veut dire que vous pouvez opérer moins cher.
Which means that you can operate less expensively. One of you spoke of the artificially low fee for Interact.
Artificially low. What is artificial with low?
Well, the price. Sorry, for Interact operates under consent order from the Competition Bureau, as you probably are aware, and as part of that consent order, they are strictly operating under a business, under a nonprofit business, not for profit, and they have to operate on a cost recovery basis. So their fees are representative of only their cost to operate their business. So there's no profit involved. They are basically, they have a debit monopoly in Canada under the Code of Conduct and with the Competition Bureau's consent order. So they're free to operate, but the fees that they charge, which is actually 0.6 of a penny to acquirers and issuers, how that translates to 12 cents at a merchant, that's another story. But that fee is artificially low versus the value that payment card provides to the marketplace. If this was anywhere else in the world, it would not be that fee. That's artificially held low because of the consent order and the limitation that they have to work on a cost recovery basis.
Donc, c'est ma bonne banque qui me fait un cadeau quand je prends Interact.
So my bank is giving me a present when I use my Interact, and the mean banks, when I use my Visa, are going to get 80% of the interchange, is what I've understood. So that means the same player, who's your partner here, depending on whether or not we use Interact or a credit card, will either we'll use we'll bring in a more reasonable amount of money, or keep a more reasonable amount of money.
Of a merchant.
Merchant.
Oh, from a merchant perspective, certainly most merchants accept Interact, and they obviously love the pricing because it is so low.
Mm-hmm.
But Interact, the debit card feature is only attractive to certain consumers. A large number of consumers use Interact because they are using their own money. But there are times where credit cards have a distinct advantage for especially affluent customers with much more disposable income to be able to make those purchases without worrying about whether or not the funds are actually in their account at that exact moment.
Thank you, Mr. LeBoeuf. I'm going to move to Senator Massicotte, to be followed by Senator Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being with us. There's no question that the introduction of credit cards in the marketplace has many advantages to merchants and theft and all kinds of issues. The problem is that we in Canada have the honor of being probably the second highest merchant fees in the world. That's where the problem lies. So what would you do? What would you propose? It's not an honor we are very proud of. What is it that you can do to bring down those fees? Because there's a lot of competition on the issuer side. The problem is, as you know, as the merchants feel, and studies would indicate that they feel forced to accept one of two, predominantly two cards, and they don't think there's ample competition at that level. There is a lot of the issuer level, but the banks decide what kind of rewards to give, how to attract customers. Merchants feel they got to accept the condition. What would you recommend to basically change that dynamic and get the merchant feeling more free to accept whatever card he wants and reduce the fees, obviously, to him?
I think it's a great question, Senator. I think that it's important to keep in mind that today any merchant can make that choice about whether or not they accept. And as I mentioned before, some very large merchants have chosen not to accept Visa. Over 1 million smaller merchants don't accept Visa or MasterCard. It is a choice that people are making every day at every level within the merchant community. I think that there's two parts then to the answer to your question in terms of what we can do. I think the first is to continue with the existing conversations that are taking place with the Department of Finance, the merchant community, and other stakeholders in this process to ensure that we come to a balanced outcome that addresses the concerns both present and future of the merchant community and the consumer community. And I think that's the number one place for us to focus. And then the second, and this is very much a corollary to that, is not to create unintended consequences with a very dramatic swing. Every market around the world has evolved in a different direction, has evolved from a different starting point to a different outcome. And where Canada is today is, in our mind, a almost perfectly balanced outcome where consumers get a lot of benefit, merchants get a lot of benefit. The state of digital commerce in Canada is very healthy, and we wouldn't want that to be jeopardized without having a sort of consultative process where all stakeholders are considered.
When you say
Question, please.
When you say 40%, you give the number. Nearly 40% of merchants don't use credit cards. But I highly suspect, given the need, cash is used, but if you look at it, it's predominantly for small transactions. I suspect if you look at the total value of retail transactions, a very, very high percentage is credit cards. Mm-hmm. So it's Mr. Representative would say 40%, but they're usually small corner stores who accept cash because credit card is so dominant in our system.
That's a good point, Senator Massicotte. I would add, though, that there are many sort of functions, such as paying your utility bills, such as paying tuition, that don't currently accept credit cards, where we very much would like them to accept credit cards. And so there are many small merchants who don't feel like they have the capability to take that on. There are big institutions that don't yet accept our products. And so we see this still as a marketplace where acceptance isn't where it could be, and where we're going to be competing against MasterCard, against American Express, against Interac, and these new players in the market I mentioned before to increase Visa acceptance.
Thank you. Senator Belmar, followed by Senator Ringuette.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Moi, je voudrais...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Code of Conduct. You said that the Code of Conduct that was agreed on between the government and the parties means to improve transparency. And so I'd like to know, the part of the Code of Conduct that talks about the relationship between merchants and consumers, what are the major elements of this Code of Conduct between merchants and consumers? And my subsequent question is, does this Code of Conduct improve competition or not?
Question. I didn't mention this earlier, but Visa is very supportive of the Code of Conduct. We believe it did greatly increase transparency in the payments industry. We also believe that there are ongoing opportunities to improve and refine the Code of Conduct. That's taking place right now, and that will create even more transparency, particularly for the merchant community and rights for the merchant community in terms of their contracts with acquiring banks and other payment providers. In response to your specific question about the relationship between merchants and consumers, there are two elements where the Code of Conduct either has or could address that. The first is in allowing or empowering merchants to share with consumers their cost of acceptance for different card types. And so if merchants do that, and let's say you walk into your corner store and the merchant says, hey, you know, I pay more for this than another brand, then the consumer can say, I like this person, I'm not going to do that. Or the merchant could say, even today, under the rules of Visa and other associations, I'd like to offer you a discount if you pay with cash. That's allowed as well. The other element that's
allowed.
That is allowed.
Yes. In the code.
It's allowed in it's allowed in Visa's rules.
Okay.
I believe it's allowed in MasterCard's rules, but I shouldn't speak for them. And then the other element, though, is around consumers understanding the impact on merchants depending on which cards they are using. And that is something that could potentially be in an update of the Code of Conduct to say that when a consumer receives a card, they understand that it has, if it's a premium card, that it may have higher merchant costs. So in our view, it's a very good outcome to have a situation where merchants can tell consumers how much they're being charged, so to speak, and consumers are aware that their purchasing decisions, their decision about which card they use, might have an impact down the line to merchants.
OK, merci. Je pensais que le code ne permettait pas.
Thank you. I didn't know that the code allowed that kind of exchange of information. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Chairman. Gentlemen, welcome. I must say that I was most astonished by your presentation because you seem to be indicating that you're providing such a great service at such a low cost. And yet the evidence that we have is not that. And by the way, this study that I'm going to be quoting from is not a study that has been either paid by Visa or MasterCard to be conducted. It's a study that is done by the European Credit Research Institute, and it was published in January 2014. Two very bright, eminent persons that looked at all the issue and involvement of interchange fees. Yes. Yes, I will.
Afterwards, so the
Yes,
committee
I
members
will.
can have it. Thank you.
And your statements are completely invalidated in this study in regards to the effect on American Express, in regards to the benefits to merchants that has been passed on to consumers. So, gentlemen, I'm sorry, but we do our research and keep up to date on the new events. That being said, in Australia, it's been for 14 years that they have capped interchange fees at 0.5%. And they're maintaining it, and you're still supplying the service, and consumers still are using their credit card. You've been in court battles since 2003, for 11 years, both of you, in different instances, but both of you consistently and continuously, since 2003, with the 28 countries of the European Union. Up to the fact that last year, with all the study and all the court challenges and all the court evidence that was brought forth, they decided that enough was enough and they were regulating you. They regulated you last July in regards to interstate fees, merchant fees, to 0.3%. And next June 2015, all the domestic interchange fee will be regulated to 0.3% for credit card. And the statement issued last year when the European Commission made that decision and introduced the legislation that has been adopted by the 28 countries, by the way. The regulation will impose cap for interchange fee applied with respect to the widespread card which merchants in practice cannot refuse. That is to say, the consumer debit and credit card, because they're also limiting the debit card, because you're also in the debit card market in the European Commission. the cap levels 0.2% of the value of the transaction for debit card and 0.3%. Okay? For credit cards are those that were accepted in commitment to the Commission from Visa Europe and MasterCard, and also from the Carte Bancaire in France. They give merchants a share of the benefits of accepting cards instead of cash, des frais bancaires. So my question to you guys is, why is it okay for you to have 0.5% merchant fees in Australia for the last 14 years, and you will have, and you have committed to comply to 28 European countries at 0.3%, and here in Canada, it was okay to gouge merchants and consumers at 3%. And by the way, the rumors that is going around of a maybe code of conduct that you will maybe reduce your fee by 0.10%, for me is probably a rounding error. Canadians cannot accept less from your organization in regards to fees than the Australian merchant and consumers or the 28 European countries, merchant and consumers. You cannot gouge them more. It is no longer acceptable. And the Canadian Tribunal said that Canada needed to regulate you guys.
Mr. Livingston, Mr. LeBoeuf.
I'll start then. I can't speak to what Visa Europe has agreed with the European Commission, as Visa Europe is a separate company from Visa International, and there's no ownership stake in Visa International into Visa Europe. So with that in mind, though, Senator Ringuette, you've asked a very valid question, which is to say that other markets have come to a very different outcome than where we are today in Canada and where we are proposing that we approximately remain here in Canada. I would focus very much on the fact that in other markets where interchange is regulated so severely, there is significant consumer harm.
That is not true. And we have all the study to say it.
Sorry, let Mr. Livingston respond, please.
Yes.
All right. In Australia, benefits on credit cards were reduced and costs were increased in the form of annual fees and other charges to consumers. In Europe, this is still something in process, but I would anticipate that the same sort of event would occur. And in Australia, the Reserve Bank of Australia did point out that they didn't see the evidence of the merchant cost savings, which are very real, at least initially from this legislation, from this regulation, being passed on to consumers in any way. So I would just take a step back and say, for here in Canada, there is a real risk to harming consumers with this sort of regulation as the reduced revenue from the banks gets offset with various other measures.
I would concur with that. So the European Union action is something that's about to take place. So where those unintended consequences that we're going to foresee down the road, where Australia has been a clear example of what can and does happen. So yes, interchange gets reduced. The banks get less revenue, doesn't offset their cost of operating a credit card program for consumers. Therefore, they have had to increase their fees to consumers and reduce the card benefits. And there has been no examples or no evidence from the Royal Bank of Australia that merchants have passed on those savings. It's been a windfall for the retailers. In fact, some retailers began surcharging credit card transactions well above what their acceptance costs would have been in the first place, which they had to clamp down on as well. So did the UK. There was surcharging basically run amok well above what their acceptance costs would have been anyways, even though they were reduced. So what we're really talking about here is the unintended consequences of a merchant-focused, primarily bill that benefits retailers but doesn't benefit consumers. It's a balanced proposition. You have to look at both sides. And we feel that the way our pricing is managed takes into account both sides of the equation. We believe the interchange today, and what it will be, is a fair representation of the value that merchants get in Canada and a fair benefit and a fair deal for consumers. That's the balance. If you tilt too much for the merchant side, the consumers will be harmed. That's the evidence we've seen in mature markets.
I would like to follow up with a quote with the announcement from the European Commission President. And he says the following. The regulation will first and foremost benefit consumer. Today, consumers pay for payment services in a hidden way through inflated retail price. This needs to change. We want consumer to be able to make conscious choices about the payment instruments they use, weighing the cost and benefit of these instruments for them. I am aware there are vested interests which have been fighting the idea of limiting interchange fees, trying to scare consumers that the impact of the regulation would be higher cardholder fees and no decrease in retail prices. However, there is every reason to believe that consumer will benefit from the disappearance of a hidden cost on their bills, since retailers compete on transparent retail prices.
Time is running out. Could you ask the question?
Well, the question is that the 28 European countries have been through this process for 10 years. 10 years they've analyzed the situation, and their conclusion was to regulate both Visa and MasterCard at 0.3%, not 3% what you're charging merchant and consumers right now. And by the way, that surcharge between what will happen in the EU and what is currently happening in Canada is costing Canadian merchant and consumers over $5 billion a year. So enough is enough, and I will continue. You can be sure of that.
We should give her extra time to testify. And you have guests here who came here, and for the last 10 minutes, I've had to listen to the testimony of the sponsor of the bill.
That was my decision that she had this time to speak. Thank you. I have had, our time is up, but I've had a last-minute intervention from Senator Rivard, who would like to put something on the record.
Monsieur le Président. Une question très rapide.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A very quick question. 45 or 50 years ago, when you started to emit credit cards, there were no premiums. Today, most of those who hold credit cards get travel points or other benefits. Do you get revenue from the bank? For example, if I pay $140 a year to get a credit card, do you get revenue on that? And what is the percentage today of cards emitted that cost nothing without a premium versus cards that cost, say, $140 a year and get you travel points?
With those facts and figures, I don't have that at hand. There is a significant number of credit cards in the Canadian marketplace that do not carry an annual fee, but I don't have the exact number.
Mr. Livingston, if you could provide that information to the clerk, that will be circulated to the committee. Our time has elapsed. On behalf of each of the members of the committee, I would like to extend our great appreciation for your appearance today. Thank you. This meeting is terminated.